Good morning, everyone, and welcome to
Good morning.
The Nara JALT MyShare event. I'm Lee McDowell, the president of the Nara chapter of JALT, of course, JALT, Japan Association of Language Teachers. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here this morning for our event. We have 22 people joining us today, which is wonderful. A lot of Nara members, a lot of local members, and a few from around Japan. We've got some from Osaka and Kobe. Maybe not everyone's here at the moment, probably still coming, but we're on 10 o'clock. We're on Japan time, so starting exactly 10 o'clock. And yes, welcome everyone. We've actually got a few members from overseas as well, which is great. You know, I guess one of the good points about having online online events is that we can include people from outside of Japan. And so welcome to everyone. This is the first live event that we've done in over 12 months. We've had events in 2020, but they were recorded online events. And so this is the first time that we've had a live event for a long time. And it's very good to have you all joining us to get together today, almost like the real thing. But as I said, sometimes even better because we can have people coming from further afield, and you can do it in your pajamas, although probably not a good idea. So yes, I just want to say welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us for this event. The MyShare event has been a long-running event for Nara JALT, and it's a great practical forum for sharing language teaching ideas. And it's exciting. We have four separate presentations today. And I am going to hand over now to our event leader, who's going to introduce the speakers and tell us a little bit about what we need to do for the discussions and keep us all on track. So good morning, Robert.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lee. So as presenters have been informed, you have 20 minutes. At the 15-minute mark, I'll give you okay, to let you know that you've got 5 minutes left. And at the 20-minute mark, I'm sorry, I'll just have to cut you off because if you go over time, this whole event is going to take longer than we really want. There will then be a 10-minute Q&A session. So if you would like to add your questions during the presentation in the chats part of Zoom, then please add your questions there. If not, just when it's time for the Q&A, we'll just have a free-for-all, and I'll cut everyone off at the 10-minute mark. We'll then have a 5-minute break for the next presenter to get ready and to allow participants to go to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, etc. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce our first presenter. So testing. Whether for course evaluations or for overall proficiency, as well as necessary evils that we as teachers cannot avoid. So there are a number of commercial tests available to help alleviate the burden of test creation on teachers. And so many commercial tests are online, and while they may be appealing because of their ability to measure all 4 language schools, they're only as good and effective as with pre-test taking preparation of both teachers and learners. So our first MyShare presenter, Jason Moser from Kanto Gakuin University, will share with us how he has been able to successfully implement one such test. So Jason, hand over to you, and your time starts now.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Thank you, everybody who's here today, and special thanks to Nara JALT for organizing this. My first ever teacher-related presentation was with Nara JALT in 2002, I believe.
Really?
And part of that was, there was a dinner involved and a small stipend. But that was quite a long time ago. I'm talking about today, as Robert mentioned, in particular the Pearson Progress Test, which is an online 4 skills test. It's no longer called the Progress Test, it's called the Benchmark Test. So if you're interested, you have to Google that name. I don't have any financial ties to Pearson, so this is just strictly my experience with the product. And the course for this involved about 500 students, so it's fairly large. And it was essentially a one-man show. So when I use we, I'm essentially just saying myself. So let's take a look at the first slide. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the CEFR, which is at the bottom. And then if you look at the top, you have the Global Scale of English, which is Pearson's scale. And if you're unfamiliar with it, each of those numbers, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, those represent qualitative differences in language use. And as you can kind of see by the graph, they basically, created a finer grand in relation to the CEFR. So it's quite a revolutionary scale, I think, but a lot of people don't know about it. And of course, on the left, we have the different tests you can take, different levels. And what I'll say is interesting about these tests is if you look at the bottom test, which we used, which is 15 to 30, the test actually tests, below, what am I doing here? It tests below and over that actual range. So the first progress test will actually test as high as 35, and it'll go as low as 10, which is quite interesting. So the first thing we did, so basically the two parts to this presentation are, first, I want to show you how important it is to prepare for implementing this kind of technology in the class. And I'll show you what we did. And then at the end, I'll just show you some of the scores so you can kind of just see what it looked like. So we started off, first of all, by trialing it. Pearson kindly, they knew we were interested in the project, in the test. So they allowed us without cost to trial it for a semester. And I did it with 40 students. And then on top of it, I did it with, I took the test myself about 10 times. But so for the next screen, these are just the basic features of the test. So it's tied to Pearson's My English Lab, which is with all their, their course book online materials are there. So if you're using that for using the textbook online and you register for the test, it's just a matter of clicking. So it's quite convenient. The test can be assigned 3 times. I think it goes up to like 2 years. There's 3 sections to it. The first section is grammar and vocabulary. Second section is listening and speaking, and the third is writing. The first section is the adaptive part. So based on your score for the first section, that determines what will follow in sections 2 and 3. So there is an adaptive element to it. And then there's these other features as well. Again, we trialed it, and these were my basic sort of conclusions about trialing it. Will be too unfamiliar for the students. So the potential to really kind of, pardon my language, for things to get screwed up and for it to turn into disaster are pretty high because it's such an unfamiliar test. I mean, you're essentially, 18, 19-year-old kids are going to be talking to a computer. The sample test has its value, but it's exactly that. It's a sample test, and it doesn't expose students to all the items. The other thing, of course, you can potentially cheat on. I don't know what it's like now, but when I used it, you could potentially cheat on it with copy paste. Not easy to do, but doable. And from trying as well in the class, I found that students at my level of student, they don't do the speaking part well in class because it's just kind of strange, you know, sitting in a class of 40 students talking into a computer. So we always thought that if we were going to use this effectively, we had to do it outside of class. But having said that, a really competent teacher can manage to do this in class. It's not that big of a deal. So moving on, so what we did, taking all these trialing conclusions into consideration, we had to kind of prepare students properly. And one of the things we did was we broke the test up into steps. So we actually did it over a week, over 1 month, as you can see here. And so we started off, you know, getting students to you know, log in and take the sample test, which records not their score, but it records which students took the test or not, equipment check. And by week 2, as you can see, we started to try to familiarize students with the test in class, you know, about 30 minutes of a 90-minute class. And week 2, we used, we focused on section 2, the first 3 listening and speaking items. We didn't focus on section 1 because it's just a simple grammar and vocabulary, you know, scrolling down and clicking on the correct term. And our students were already using online learning, so it wasn't a big deal. And then week 3, so week 2 students we'd familiarize them with that. They'd go home, take the test, that section of the test, pause it, come back, and proceed to week 3, where we finish off the 4, 5, 6 items for listening, speaking, familiarize students with them, and that kind of. So it's kind of unique that we actually did this test over a month. But having said that, by the 3rd time of the test, basically you just had to assign it and give them 2 weeks to do it because they'd become already familiarized and comfortable with it. The other thing we did is, so I'll just show you, this is an item. This is item 4 from session 2, and it's a retell. So you just listen to the story, and then you got 30 seconds to retell it. So, you know, most students have never experienced this kind of, these types of items before. So one of the things we did, or I did, is I provided them with a guide sheet right here, and of course written in Japanese. So this is the session 2, section 2 guide sheet. And if you look at number 4, that's this thing right here. And basically we, in Japanese, told the students, okay, you've got 3, 4. 4 is a listen and retell. It's 30 seconds, and we included the steps. Just click, listen, beat, retell it in your own words, and then they have to do it about 4 or 5 times. Now, interesting, I want to add, it's not the same story 4 or 5 times. It's a different story they have to tell 5 times. So this test is very, very thorough. I think the longest sort of repeating of an item is like 7, 8 times. So it's a very, very thorough test. So students, when they were taking this test, had this little guide sheet in front of them to show them, you know, how things were sequenced and exactly what they had to do. And, you know, asking students later, this was quite useful for them. And by the 3rd test, a lot of students didn't feel they need to use it anymore. For teachers, they had this as well, but we also provided them with very specific information about how they should teach or familiarize students to the test. And this is an example here. This is, again, item 4, the listen and tell. And if you look here, you know, we're telling them it's not verbatim, so you don't want the students to try to memorize it. Hints like always be talking. It's not measuring grammar and vocabulary. It's measuring communicative ability. So telling teachers these important points, and then, you know, in the 2nd paragraph, very specific things like the short stories themselves are about 4 to 6 sentences, and usually a sentence is between, you know, 6 and 14 words. So we relayed all that information to the teachers, and we even went as far as to show them or to tell them how they could practice it using their course book. So if you look at how to practice, I've outlined, I've highlighted dialogues that fit this particular type of item, and teachers could practice it in class. So, you know, a lot of prep. In regards to cheating and not taking the test seriously, so the test can be done in about 45 minutes, and if you just fool around, you can do it in 10. But in order to get the students to take the test seriously, we counted it as part of their grade, which in the past we had never done for TOEIC. TOEIC was just, we had students take, this test actually, we used it as a replacement for TOEIC, and TOEIC we never counted as part of their grade, but this time we embedded it in their course grade. And we also introduced a system where if you do the test properly, you get 20%. Like for one test, you get 20%. If you don't do the test properly, you get 0. So how do we know that it was done properly? Well, the system actually sends you warnings. So when the student's grade comes in, it'll highlight the grade saying, oh, you shouldn't trust this grade because of this, this, and that. You get a warning from the system. And also the other way you can check is something like this. If you look on the left side here, here's an example of a student that did it in 10 minutes, about 10, 15 minutes, and everything on the test is below 10. So there was no effort there. Whereas on the right side, the student, you know, if with these types of tests, if it's level appropriate, if the student does make some effort, it will show something. Like, you know, the first test is from 15 to 30. And if you look at the top, the student got 13 in grammar. So even though they tested below the sort of the normal boundary of the test, it still recorded something. So we actually showed students this and said, listen, if you do it properly, something will appear, and then you get your 20%. So we used that, and that was quite effective. Basically the students, once they kind of realize that, okay, if they do it properly and don't try to cheat or game the system, then I'll get 20%. If I fool around and, you know, try and cheat, whatever, and I get caught, I get 0. So, I mean, there was no incentive for them to cheat. Okay, what we're going to look at now is sort of the final results of the test. So if you look on the left here, 89% of the students took all 3 tests over the course of the year. If I had counted 2 tests out of 3, it would have been well over 95%. So we had a very good completion rate. And if you look below, those are the TOEIC completion rates. So compared to TOEIC, we did well. If you're looking at software issues, you can see the next column, not really any big issues. In cases like this, all we did was contact Pearson and told them, and then they reset the test for us. And the student unfortunately had to take it again, but it's 45 minutes of their life. The other thing here, the big sort of plus of the whole testing system, of course, if you look, a number of students who made some type of progress, 72%. So these are non-required English, a non-required English course, and you've got 72%. You've got evidence that says that 72% of the students made some progress. I mean, for a program, that's a pretty, you know, we're moving into this world of evidence-based learning, and I think this type of test is one way to easily show evidence of progress over the course of the year. And then if you look at the next category, these are students that actually jumped a band. So they went from A1 to A1 plus, or A1 to A2. So having that type of evidence, I think, is quite important. And I think my own opinion is people are kind of crazy not to use this test. Looking at, this is what the type of information that the teachers get here. So these are the students, and then at the top you see the 3 overall times, and then it's broken down into reading, listening, speaking, and writing. And you can also see for grammar. And if you look, you can see these little arrows, these little underlined with stars. They tell you that something was potentially wrong with the test. not necessarily cheating. So for example, it'll pick up background noise and it'll say, well, there was background noise in the test and this might have impacted the grade. But these are the results this is what you see with the scores. And then you can click on the student and you can even look in finer detail. So, and the students get to see this, and my impression is that the students, you know, when they started to see by the second test, some of them started to see that they were getting better, and by the third test, they were quite happy. You know, it's quite motivated. It's quite motivating for them. Finally, here's a final some more data to look at. So I analyzed every single class, and I'm class 1, and in our placement test, my class is about 4th or 5th out of all the classes, which is about 15, 16 classes. So good, but not the best. But my class had the best scores throughout. And I think the simple reason for that, despite not being the top student in the placement test, I think the simple reason for that is because of me, because I was the most informed, qualified person to familiarize students with the test. And as you can see, 24 out of 24 did the test. The scores went up average each time. 20 out of 24 students showed some progress. And then you can see on the far right, students that moved actually went up a band. And you can see the starting level after the first test of students. So you can see that there was some students actually did, more students actually passed the test and were now kind of in the CEFAR band, right? Class 2 below is from a different teacher. And if you look, what stands out is if you look at the first test score, the placement tests between her class and my class, they're almost negligible. They're essentially the same level. But if you look, her 14 is quite low. And the problem with that, the problem we had with this test was a lot of teachers didn't take the test seriously and didn't properly familiarize the students to it. And that really depressed the first score. And this teacher, so teachers were provided with the test, they were allowed to take it. And after the first test, no teacher had even taken the test. I was the only one who had ever taken the test. And this teacher, class 2, she's actually a full-time teacher. So it's kind of somewhat inexcusable. But as you can see, she kind of smartened up, so to speak, and had good results at the end. You see some students made progress. But one of the things that you can see with this type of test is you can really see good teaching from bad teaching. It's quite obvious. So we had classes, top classes, where the teacher we knew was kind of semi-incompetent. And in some cases, in one class, the scores actually went down from the base score, it actually digressed. Whereas, interestingly, in that department, the lowest class, which is quite separated in the placement test, that teacher actually, her scores for the progress test were equal to the top classes scores. So you can, one of the sort of dangers of this test is it really exposes bad teaching and reciprocally shows really good teaching. So that's about all I have to say. I think I got 20 seconds left. So sorry if I spoke a little bit fast. And that's about it. So I just say thank you for everybody.
Okay. Thank you. You've exactly on time.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, now, thank you, Jason. And we'd like to now open it up for a 10-minute discussion. If anyone has any questions, please, now's the time. There are no chat questions, so hey, Lee, go. Lee, hi.
Is that okay? Can I ask?
Yeah.
Thanks, Jason. Interesting presentation. I'm curious about like the choice, the rationale in your university implementing this one. I'm not sure if I caught that. You're in implementing this test, but perhaps what I'm particularly interested in hearing is like what are would you say are the advantages of this test over, for example, TOEIC? Because I think TOEIC is really widespread throughout universities. So, well, yeah, certainly it is. But for our university, where I am, where I work, we're using TOEIC, and I'm just curious to get your. I'm sure you've had some experience with TOEIC in the past, to get your take on like the advantages of this test over, for example, the TOEIC.
Okay.
Or even ACAN, you might throw an ACAN in there as well, because I think it's where it's actually a criterion-based test, right? This test.
Yeah, I think so. This test replaced TOEIC, because so I started teaching at this university about 6 years ago, and they were using TOEIC, and the TOEIC scores were brutal, obviously, like most places. You'd have like 500 students, or whatever number amount take them, and 2 people would score over 500, right? So to me it was a big waste of money. And this course was managed by a committee, like the liberal arts committee, and so I was kind of attacking TOEIC. As soon as I got to the university, I was attacking TOEIC and just saying it was a waste of money, which it was. And so finally, after about 2 years, they kind of listened to what I was saying, and they said, okay, well, do you got anything else? What can we do? And so I gave them the option of no test or test. And we looked at different tests, and so they wanted to have a test. There was money for it, and they wanted to have a test. And I put the no test on the table, but they wanted the test. And so we looked at different tests, and this is the one that we liked. And again, one of the reasons why we were kind of moving away from TOEIC is because our departments are nutrition, education, design, and communication. And so for nutrition and education, there's no real need to study TOEIC. And the teachers in that department, the non-English teachers, eventually recognized that as well. They didn't even really know what TOEIC was. I mean, they approved it, but they didn't really know what it was, that it was, a business type genre. So I don't know if that answers your question. Basically, we had to have a test. TOEIC was a waste of money, and the teachers kind of recognized that we don't really need to, there's no need to be kind of doing business English at this stage.
Okay, good, thank you. Any other questions, please? We have 6 minutes left, so I have a question. So you spent a bit of time giving instructions in Japanese for the students.
Yeah.
Do you think the test publisher should actually have a multi-language function, so students could choose, have the instructions in Japanese? Or?
Yeah, no, yes, I mean, because we use the product, like we're one of only a few universities that used it at this scale at that time. And so we were asked for feedback, and one of the things that I mentioned was, at least for the first couple bands, for the A1, A2 levels, they should have Japanese or language support. So that's been communicated, I know not just by me, but other users in Japan. But whether they add that or not, they don't have it right now for the benchmark, as far as I know. But I mean, I guess it's something they've talked about, or we've told them.
It's not, sorry to interrupt, but it's not designed for Japan, is it? I imagine, or is it? Is it designed for a Japanese audience, or is it worldwide?
It's worldwide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering, because you can, most online tools now have multi-language. You can choose your language kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be such a hard thing for them to do if they wanted to. Just one other question. A lot of universities are on limited budgets and always complaining about money. So just how much does it cost per user to take
okay,
this,
so so we you can negotiate. So there, we were using a course book, right? So so because we were using course book, the Pearson, one of the Pearson course books, they were willing to give us a discount, but it's comparable to TOEIC price-wise. It's very comparable to TOEIC, but on top of that, you get the test. At this particular test, you got it 3 times, and it's not within 1 year. I think the limit might be 2 years. I'm not quite sure, but it's not. It's not for like a license for 1 year. It's longer than that. Most products, online products, are at least 2 years for any type of publisher. So the fact that we were using the course book and we were doing it with quite a few students, we were able to negotiate a cheaper price, and the price ended up being what we pay for TOEIC.
Okay, thank you. Ali, yes.
What's the textbook, by the way, the course book?
Well, no, it's any Pearson course book.
Mm-hmm. But
anything.
curiously, what is the course book that you're using?
Okay, well now it was cutting edge, and now it's Roadmap. It's a brand new one. And we use their learning management system as well. So the test was just a matter of clicking from homework to test. It's all there in front of you. There was nothing really special, like nothing complicated about it once the test was loaded.
Yeah. Any other questions out there? We still have 2 more minutes, 2.5 minutes.
I would add that, I would just add that, if you're serious about using the test and you have, a certain amount of students and you want to trial it, I found them to be Pearson to be very reasonable. Like they gave us free accounts to trial the test. And they didn't say, well, we'll give you this many. I said, they just asked you how many do you want? I said, okay, I'll do it for 1 class. And they actually made the accounts for us.
That's good business, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And just
anyone else have something further? Yeah, Ellie, yeah.
Sorry, if there are no other
Go
questions, I'm interested. You said like taking the test 3 times. You've got students taking the test multiple times. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so is it like a pre-post test setup, or you do it?
You can. We did it in May, and then October, and then January. So we did it. The test is assigned 3 times, as you can assign it 3 times, and you could do it over, I'm guessing, minimum 2 years. But our course only runs for a year. So we did it at the beginning of the semester, like late April, early May. And then when they came back, we did it like right at the start of the 2nd semester. And then we did it at the end of the semester.
Right. And that's all one cost.
Yes. Yes. But I believe now it's the benchmark is the benchmark system now, their new test, it's changed a bit. Like you can just buy 1 test. I believe you can buy like 2 tests or 1 test or whatever. And I don't think, and whereas we had to assign 1 level of test to all the students, you can actually, I believe with the benchmark, you can, all the tests are available. So we bought the 15 to 30 test, but I think now with the system they have now, you can actually assign different classes, different tests, which I think is quite a good thing as well.
Quick question.
Yes.
Sorry. So if you're trialing it for your students, do you recommend taking the same test that they might be taking, like that same level? Would that be the best way to get familiar with it, or?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, for sure.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
We have to wrap it up there. But if you want to finish your sentence, go.
No,
Jason.
You definitely, if you're going to trial it, you want to use the test that you're going to use, because the items and the sequence is probably, if I recall, it's different.
So it depends on how the student takes the test, because it's adaptive, right? So.
Well, yeah, but sorry, I'll just the first level test, the items, there's lots and lots of different items. They retest you on different content, but it's the same item. So students end up taking different tests, but it's within that testing area.
Okay, we have to stop there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jason.
You're
very
very
informative.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay, we're going to take MyShare presentation. So as everyone probably knows, there are now many online tools available to teachers to assist with language learning and classroom management. So some of these tools you have to buy them, either it's a one-time payment or the subscription-based, and some are free. Our next presenter, Rachel Patterson from Berlitz and Kindai University Language Center, will share with us her experiences with using one such tool called Padlet. Now, personally, it's a tool that I'm not familiar with, so it'll be interesting to see how it can assist with language teaching and classroom management. So, Rachel, your time begins from now.
Thank you, Robert. Good morning. My name is Rachel, and I am with the Kindai University Faculty of International Studies in partnership with Berlitz, and I'm going to introduce Padlet today. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so this presentation is partially me introducing Padlet and also showing some examples of how our teachers used it during the 2020 and 2021 semesters. And then after that, I would like for us to kind of use Padlet to see what it's like. If you've used it before, fantastic. This will be a review. And if you haven't before, you'll get a chance to see what our students experienced when using this online tool. So just a little bit of quick background information. I apologize for arriving a little late. So just a little self-intro here. Again, my name is Rachel Patterson. I'm the Assistant Academic Director at Kindai University, the ELS Study Abroad program specifically, and we work with the Faculty of International Studies to prepare first-year students to study abroad. As you can probably imagine, our students did not study abroad this year or the previous year, and so we had to scramble to find some online tools and online platforms to help them continue their English studies in spite of all of the different challenges we faced. I've been teaching EFL for about 8 years and specifically in Japan for 6 years. And my hobbies are playing guitar, wood burning, and studying Japanese when I do find free time. So I would like to talk a little bit about what Padlet is in case you're not familiar. Padlet, if you can imagine, is kind of like a digital corkboard where users can share posted content. They can create the content themselves, or they can copy or post content from other places as well. And for us, we used it specifically to help with kind of classroom management and doing online classroom activities during the 2020 and 2021 semester. So teachers can post announcements, assignments, give prompts, and give feedback on student work. Students can also post their work. They can also collaborate, they can be creative, and they can share and respond to ideas. And Padlet's really great because it has a variety of layouts and features that can make online classes more engaging, as opposed to the more kind of top-down or the more, like presentation-based Zoom lessons. A little bit more about Padlet. There is a free version, and for that you get 3 Padlets, or 3 digital corkboards. After 3, it will not allow you to create any more. And there is a paid version as well, which allows you to have unlimited Padlets. I'm not exactly sure of the price. I think the last time I checked, it was, I think, $8.95 US per year, but please don't quote me on that. I haven't checked recently. What's great about Padlet is that you can also limit user access. So unlike other online platforms or social media sites like Twitter and things like that, you can limit who has access to your Padlet, and it's only available to those you share the link with. So teachers can create a Padlet, share the link with the students. The students can then access it and post texts, images, videos, audio recordings, and all kinds of other things like that. For our program, we found it most useful. We found it very useful for teaching pretty much all of the levels, even beginners. And I'll show you an example a little bit later. Students, again, can access the platform from any device, whether they're using a smartphone, a tablet, or a PC. And I'm not sure about smartphones and how many kinds of things you can post using smartphones, but with PC, you can post, like I said, videos, audio, text, messages, things like that. Okay, so I'll show you a more specific example of what our teachers did. Before that, I'll show you some of the different kinds of layouts that we have in Padlet that we used. The most common one that we used was the wall and the stream. The stream is really useful because it mimics, or it's very similar to things like Facebook, Instagram, a lot of social media sites that students are already very good at using and very used to using. And so students can post content and scroll through, teachers can post things and scroll through, and it makes it really useful for communicating in an online environment. We also use the shelf layout as well for kind of a daily assignment and daily classroom posts and things like that. But there's some other really great ones as well that I haven't tried personally that I would like to in the future. So for example, the map and the timeline are something I've always wanted to try. And if you have before, please let me know and how that worked for you. But those are some of the other layouts that you can use when creating your Padlet. It might take a little while to figure out which one works best for your class. So I recommend if you start or create a Padlet, just try a few and see what you can do with them, and then pick the one that works best for you. And also, just as a side note, I am in no way, shape, or form paid or sponsored by Padlet. This is just me showing my, just kind of telling about how my experience was with using this, this online tool. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples now that teachers used Padlet, how teachers use Padlet in their classrooms. This teacher, this is just a screenshot, but this teacher was using Padlet for a reading and writing class, specifically reading a graded reader together as a group. And so the students were assigned an online graded reader. And then after each chapter, the assignment was to post a video reaction to each chapter. So the teacher started with an example reaction, posting, and I can't play the video, unfortunately, this one's no longer available, so I do apologize. But the teacher would post his video reaction, and the students would post their reactions after that to each chapter. There are also some activities and some reading comprehension check questions and things like that, that the students would then read and post, and that would allow the teacher to check to see if the students had been reading, had been absorbing the material, and were answering the questions within a certain amount of time. So first, let's look at some student dialogues that a teacher used for a vocabulary and speaking class. Okay. All right. So this is an example of a Padlet that a teacher created. I'm just going to zoom out just a little bit so you can see here more. And I'm going to scroll to the bottom to show where the original post started, and then I'll work my way up.
Can't see.
Okay. Oh, you can't see?
No,
My apologies. Okay.
Rachel, your screen has stopped moving. Maybe your screen is moving for you, but we just get the screen and your cursor doesn't move. Or there you go. It's working now.
Does this work now? I do apologize about that. Okay. All right. Is that clear? Do you all see a yellow screen with pink donuts?
And donuts.
Okay,
I see
fantastic.
Donuts, definitely pink.
Fantastic. Donuts. All right. All right. Now we're back in the game. Okay. So this class was a speaking and vocabulary class. Mainly, this class is designed for students to practice pragmatics, where they have to deal with certain situations and they have to use language and phrases they study in class in order to kind of simulate interactions that they might encounter when they study abroad. So this teacher created a scenario and posted it, and the students had 20 minutes in Zoom to join a Padlet, create a dialogue, work together in pairs, and then they had to act out the dialogue in Zoom in breakout rooms. So for example, here we have, you're hanging out at a popular cafe, you see your favorite celebrity, maybe that's not realistic, but the celebrity is enjoying coffee with his or her friends, and you want to ask that celebrity for a photograph or an autograph. So the students would then have to create a role play, rehearse, and then perform it. So here is an example of the rubric that the students would have a copy of or have access to know what they're being assessed on. And then after they work together in pairs, they create the dialogue here. So here's an example of one dialogue that students created. And then they can post the dialogue, and teachers can then go back and add feedback, correct any mistakes, correct any errors or things like that. And it really allows the students a way to collaborate together and still build the skills that they would otherwise be able to, that they can't do in an in-person environment. Okay, so after they rehearse the dialogue, they go into breakout rooms, they perform it, and then the teacher would give them a score and then and provide feedback on what they did. So that's just one example that teachers used in using Padlet. Another example that I'm going to show you is from a presentations class that a teacher was teaching for an intermediate level. So these are beginners, by the way, I should have mentioned that earlier. These are, I would like to say A2, maybe upper A2 beginners. This group are B1. And this again was for a presentations class. And so I'll kind of walk you through how the teacher set up this Padlet. This is in the grid style. And basically he just started with the goals for the day. Any assignments that the student had to do or upcoming presentations that were assigned to the class, and the instructions that for that assignment. And then the students would take the instructions, work together in Zoom, create their presentations, and then present in Zoom. So not so much like students posting here, but just a way for teachers to get information out to all of the students in his class. In an easy, in a fast and quick manner. So one thing that I really liked about this Padlet was the presentation reflections that I'm showing here. And after the students did their presentations, the students were then tasked to post their responses onto Padlet. So what are some of the topics? What were some of the topics from your peers that caught your attention? Why were they effective? What was something that you think they could have improved upon? And then the students would then respond to their peers' presentation. So it's a really great platform for peer feedback as well, so that the students can then post their responses and the students can read peer review from their classmates. And you can also like or heart some of the posts as well. So that's also an option as well. Okay, and so the last example that I want to show is from a a writing class that one of our teachers had. Our writing class, in this writing class, the teacher posted daily journals that the students had to respond to. He would post daily journal prompts and the students would post their responses to it. Okay, so for this one, this is an advanced group, and the teacher posted daily topics, and these were kind of abstract, and he wanted to see where the students could go with these abstract topics, or sorry, these very general broad topics, not abstract. But for example, the first day was circles, the next day was triangles, the next day was squares, and each student had to post what the shape meant in their life, or how they observed the shape in their daily environment and things like that. So one thing I really liked about one thing I'll kind of point out here was is for the topic of triangles. students wrote about things that they could see in their daily life, like food, the shapes of chips, pyramids, all kinds of things that they could see using triangles. And the teacher would then give feedback about their writing, style, choice of style, vocabulary, grammar, that sort of thing. Students also wrote a little bit about, here she wrote about being in band club or being in the brass band club and playing the triangle and how that kind of evoked that memory. This student wrote about how triangles occur naturally, or she first thought that triangles were an unnatural shape and didn't occur in nature. And then after doing some more, doing a little more observation, she found several examples of how triangles occur in nature. This student also wrote about food, how we eat, slices of cake and pies and pastries that are usually in the shapes of triangles. And this student I thought was really, had a really interesting post. He wrote about the difference between the hanging straps in trains. Some are circular shaped and some are triangular shaped. And he did a deep dive as to why that's the case. And through his research, he actually found that the triangular shaped handles are easier for elderly passengers to grip. And he didn't know that before really looking into the subject. And so after he did a little research, he posted how the triangular shapes are better for elderly passengers to hold on to. And he even posted a link to his, an article linking to this to this research. And so we also kind of use it to branch students into the academic side of doing research, posting it, and making sure you cite your sources. Not exactly a perfect execution, but something that was really great for students to do using this platform. And again, students can read other posts and comment on them as well. Okay. So I'm going to now switch over to a Padlet that I have created, and I would really like for us to try out Padlet. I'm going to, let's see, show a link, and I'll post it in the chat as well. And I would like for us to access the Padlet and post our response to the question I have created there. Okay, can everyone see my slide? I'm going to post this link to the chat. Oh, first, so far, before any questions or anything like that? I kind of went pretty quickly. So
only about 3 minutes left, by the way.
Oh, I do? Okay. All right, so. Okay, here we go. All right. And the password is Nara JALT. It's all one word. In lowercase. Lee, I just saw your question about wood burning. And I'll show you a quick example here.
I'm not getting in. Is the password working for people?
Yeah, I think the password doesn't work for me either. Nara JALT, all lowercase, okay. All one word.
Okay.
Password incorrect.
Okay. Let me double check that. That might be on my end. Oh, I apologize. I got confused. It should be JALT Nara.
JALT Nara.
Sorry.
JALT Nara.
JALTNARA.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, that's working.
Okay, phew. So Lee, I think you asked about wood burning. This is just an example of.
I see, and now I understand. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a few more of these, but.
I suppose everything. What your own question? You answer at least one.
Is everyone able to access the website okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this would be a mock assignment that, or an example of an assignment that I would post for one of my classes. And this is just to kind of get everyone kind of like a rapport builder, or maybe a review of some key phrases that we studied in the previous lesson. And here. So I'm not sure if you can see on my screen. If you aren't familiar with Padlet, these are some of the options you can use as well. You can require approval. So if you have some students who like to push buttons and test the ropes, you can require a moderator to approve all posts. You can also set a filter for profanity as well, which is really nice. You can decide how posts appear, whether they're first or last. You can add comments, or you can take away comments depending on what kind of post you want to assign or create. You can design color scheme, font, wallpaper, all kinds of little unique things that can help you differentiate different classes, which is also important, but also to kind of give that little.
Rachel, I have to stop you there.
Sure.
20 minutes is up, and I'm sure a lot of participants have questions about this. It seems quite an interesting tool. So I'm going to open it up now for 10 minutes of Q&A. So please, anyone, there are no questions in the chat. So anyone has a question, please start now. Just go for it. Questions, please.
Paul, hi.
Yeah, Lee.
Hey, Rachel. Thanks for your presentation. Just a question. Can students also upload videos, for example, videos of themselves presenting to the app?
So for one teacher, yes, he had videos that the students were required to post a like a video reaction to book chapters of a book that they were reading together in a reading class. And so if the student posted the video, that kind of counted as their participation grade for the day. And then also it was a great way for the teacher to, or for the student to practice speaking. A lot of our students want to do things like become Instagram influencers or to become social media experts and things like that. And so being able to have a platform where they can practice posting videos and content in a second language was something that he kind of provided a platform for.
Thanks. So students could potentially upload videos of themselves presenting to the app.
Yes.
Would there be any limit to the length of the presentation? That's
a really good question. I'm not entirely sure. I imagine you probably can't post very lengthy videos or very bandwidth heavy videos, especially if you're using the free version. If you use the unlimited version, and I don't know this, so I do apologize, but I imagine that you can probably post heavier or like longer videos or longer audio clips. But I'll look into that, and if I can try and find out for you.
Thanks.
Lee, you had a question.
Yeah. Yes, I think I have my hand up, and you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was curious how you came across Padlet, because like this time last year, or yeah, a bit earlier, when the pandemic first set in, we were all scrambling to try and find a good solution for our online what was then called emergency remote teaching situation. I came across Google Classroom, Slack, and Zoom were the three tools that kept coming up again and again and again. And sort of Google Classroom became the standard for me now. And I'm just curious, how did you come across Padlet? Because it never actually registered for me. And then how, if you're able to compare the two, for example, with Google Classroom.
So I came across Padlet, to answer your first question, I came across Padlet through this person here, and I'm not sure if can you see my screen?
Yep.
His name is Russell Stannard. He does. He has a huge YouTube channel, or a large YouTube channel, a lot of following, and he focuses on online training. Online teaching and teacher training. And he has tons of videos on different platforms. So things like Skype, Zoom, Google Classroom as well. I don't personally have a lot of experience using Google Classroom. Our program focuses more on using Microsoft-based products. So I can't answer I don't know how to compare it to Google Classroom very well. But one of the videos I came across was using Padlet to do more student-centered learning, and to have a way for students to post content and give feedback in an easy way. So that's how I came across this video, or this platform. Just one day, just trying to find resources that we could use that were relatively inexpensive and didn't sell a lot of data, a lot of personal information and data to the highest bidder. So Padlet is one of those websites that kind of fit into that little model. And ever since I've been using it. I used it a little bit in a few of my classes, but a lot of our teachers went and got their own personal paid version, or use it just for their own use for their classes.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask, Rachel, is it something that you would use during class, or is it something that works really well for students to do outside of class, or?
Both. I know that teachers, I used it usually at the end of class, some kind of like an exit ticket, or like a final roundup of the class where students would post what they learned or what they took away from classes. Some teachers have used them during class. So at the very beginning, they pull up the Padlet, they share their screen on Zoom. It's got all of the daily goals. They've posted their the assignments and the workbook pages and the homework, so that it's all in one place. And because it's a link, students can access it at any time. So if a student is absent or misses class due to illness or something like that, they can always go to the Padlet and find out what they missed, what they need to catch up on, or still participate in some way. One of the questions, I think, was, what is the time it took to create one of these Padlets? For me, honestly, registering the count probably takes the longest amount of time, and it's not that long. You just, register your email address and username, and then you can open the Padlet. If you're like me and you fuss with all of the, design and little things, then it could take you a little bit longer. But for me, I would say for setting up a general class, putting the goals, putting the assignments, putting the homework and the task of the day, I would say it took me no more than maybe 20 minutes maximum. And students were able to use it very quickly. Even, like I said, my lower levels were able to jump in and use it because it's so similar to the social media sites that they're already using. Any other questions?
Anyone have any more questions? We have 3 more minutes of Q&A left for this session.
Can I have a question?
Yes.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Motoko, go ahead. Motoko-sensei, go ahead.
Well, I just really wanted to ask a student reaction. So what kind of reaction you received from student, low level and high level?
Positive. We never had any negative reactions. It was something that students were able to, like I said, they were able to adapt and use it very quickly. It was something that they're using online platforms in English. So that was something that was very unique for them. They had not done before. It was something where they could, again, post their own ideas, respond to each other, especially in a time where they're not able to interact face-to-face. So that was kind of like a way for them to connect and build rapport and to learn about one another in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do because of the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you.
Georgie, you had a question?
Yeah. How do you evaluate students' performances? I mean, can you download the student writing?
So I don't know if we can download the students' writing. We didn't do it that way. The teacher would just read, and then if, you know, for things like more, what's the word I'm looking for? For writing assignments that were more weighted, the teachers would just have the students email them essays or email, you know, graded assessment. So we didn't, I don't have any, I don't have an answer to how we assessed those types of writing assignments, but for example, the dialogue, the vocabulary dialogue assignment, that was assessed with a rubric, and then the teacher would send the students their scores either through the chat in Zoom or through email.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Is it something your teachers will continue to use now that you're back in the classroom, do you think?
Yes, actually, so some of us, we had done face-to-face lessons earlier. They got canceled because of Osaka having high case numbers, but the teachers in their in-person classes were using Padlet, and students were on their phones putting in, you know, inputting text and sharing videos and things like that, sharing content. And the teachers were able to flexibly use Padlet both in person as well as online. So that's a really great reason also to use Padlet, is if you suddenly have to go online, there's no huge shift that you have to do, you know, regarding how you can manage your classroom that way.
Okay, if there are no more questions, there's only 30 seconds left. So if there are no more questions, then I think we'll stop it there. And thank you, Rachel, for that interesting presentation. Very informative.
Thank you.
Right, welcome back, everyone. And time for MyShare number 3 presentation. So giving a presentation even in one's native language can be a very nerve-wracking and sometimes daunting task. So doing a presentation of foreign language, as we can all imagine, can even be more stressful. So Paul McAleese from Nara Institute of Science and Technology will share with us some techniques he has used in the classroom to help learners overcome their apprehension and anxiety in speaking before an audience. So Paul, your time starts from now.
So yeah, as Rob mentioned, I'm going to talk about building learner confidence and fluency with mini poster presentations. Specifically, I'm going to talk about an activity called 3-minute mini poster presentations. Basically, this involves, it's kind of like a controlled mingle activity where the presenters present to different partners one-on-one for around 3 minutes. And the partners are given specific listening tasks to complete for the different presentations. So today, I'll talk about the activity itself, and then in the second half of the talk, I'll talk about how I adapted it to a COVID-19 face-to-face course, and also a COVID-19 fully online course. So let me just give you some very quick background first. So I've been using this 3-minute mini poster presentation activity with Japanese university students for a number of years, really with a very wide range of levels as well, from upper beginner to mid-intermediate. Most of the class sizes I've used it with are around 20 to 30 students. The reason I started doing this type of activity is with other speaking activities I've used in class, I found it difficult to get the students to produce a lot in English. I'm sure everyone has had similar problems. I think a lot of it comes down to they haven't had time to prepare what they want to say in the activities. Also, the topics haven't been engaging enough. And sometimes it's just because they didn't like the partner or the people they were paired off with. I also think that being able to do a short presentation in English is a really important skill. And a lot of my students were very apprehensive about speaking in front of a class. Plus, with the large class sizes, we didn't really have enough time to have everyone present to the whole class. So I started doing these 3-minute mini poster presentations. So what I would do is, excuse me, to set up the activity, I would tell the students, obviously, you have to prepare a presentation, prepare to speak in 3 minutes in English on a given topic. Everyone would have the same topic. And the listeners would also be given tasks that they had to complete while listening to the presentations. Now, the thing about this, they also had to prepare and print out an A4 sized paper with a number of photos or images on it to help them present in the presentation. So the posters would just have the title of the presentation with 4 or 5 images or posters. Here's an example I gave of a poster that I had students make on a topic. So the topic in this case was one I used with a previous university. These were quite low-level students, probably around upper beginner level. And the topic here was a place I traveled to. And so the students had to choose 4 or 5 photos to put on their poster, print it out, bring it to class, and obviously talk about it for 3 minutes without using any notes. In this activity, I told the students that they would be evaluated based on their delivery. So things like, eye contact with the listener, rate of speech, body language, and so on. So I told them, obviously, they had to prepare and also practice a lot before the presentation day. And then also, this is an example of a form I gave them for listening to other student presentations. So it's just very, very simple. It just gets them to complete the name of the presenter and the place that they traveled to in this example. And then on the presentation day itself, I would divide the class into 2 groups. Half of the students would be presenters. The other half would be listeners. And I would have the presenters stand equally spaced around the perimeter of the classroom. Then I would assign each presenter 1 listener. And then say that, so that they do their presentation to their partner. And then after 3 minutes, the alarm will go, and the listener students had to move 1 presenter to their right. So every 3 minutes, the listeners here would rotate clockwise around the room and listen to another presentation. Does that make sense? And then halfway through the activity, after each presenter had presented to a number of different listeners, or maybe all the listeners, then I would stop the activity and I would get I would switch the roles of the presenters and listeners. So the listeners will become the presenters become the listeners, and then continue again until the listeners, the new presenters have presented to a number of different students. And then I would finish the activity and go into the feedback as 1 group. During the activity itself, as the teacher, I would just be sort of wandering silently around the room, monitoring and evaluating the students presenting. And obviously also I would be the one that's setting the timer every 3 minutes for the the listeners to change to the next presenter. I often found it quite useful to use an iPad and a touch pen to make notes for my feedback. I actually use the Teacher Kit app. So I just take a screenshot of the Teacher Kit app front, which has with the students' photos on it already, and I plug that into a note-taking app, and I just write their feedback on their photo, which makes it pretty efficient. Obviously, you could do that in a paper version as well. So as you can probably imagine, there are countless different ways you can use this 3-minute activity in your lessons, I generally use it I generally use it as a sort of a review task to review some content that's already been done in the lesson. But in my present university now, a lot of the English courses have a extensive reading program incorporated. So another way I use it now is to actually have the students do their book reviews, do their 3-minute presentations on graded readers that they read. So they recommend a graded reader to students in their presentation. You have to keep the information they give about the reader quite simple, because obviously that sort of defeats the purpose of extensive reading if they're giving the details of the plot of a book. So, for example, giving the opinion of the book, or just giving some basic information about the book they read. Another way was we assigned reading on a business series of graded readers. And with this activity, this was for a business class, I asked the students to read different books in this series and then just note down the 3 or 4 most useful tips they got from the book, and then present that as their 3-minute presentation. So there are different ways you can use the activity, of course. But then, of course, we got hit with COVID-19. Everything changed. But before I get into the COVID-19 part of my presentation, just a few sort of outcomes from doing this type of activity with my learners. It really did improve their spoken production using this activity. I think one reason is they had a lot of time to prepare their talks. Another thing is that the students quite enjoyed, standing up and moving around the classroom, and they seem to really enjoy changing their partners every 3 or 4 minutes, just to sort of keep it varied. And it gave them sort of engaging topics. It was important to give them engaging topics to talk about, of course. The posters definitely helped them present, having the photos with them, and it helped also keep the listeners interested, of course. And importantly, it was really good to give the listeners simple listening tasks to keep them engaged as well. COVID-19, yeah. So from what was it, like fall semester last year, our university started doing COVID-19 face-to-face classes again. So obviously in the COVID-19 face-to-face classes, everything changed. All the students had to wear masks, and we had to maintain social distancing within the class at pretty much all times. So I was sort of a little bit apprehensive about how I was going to do speaking activities in general under these conditions. Obviously, wearing a mask in class makes it difficult to speak, makes it difficult to hear other speakers. But I decided to try and be as proactive as possible with this sort of situation. So what I did is, in the first face-to-face class, I introduced students to language and strategies that could help them communicate more effectively wearing a mask. And it's sort of language that most students need anyway. For example, what have we got down here? Language that they can use to check or confirm information with the speaker or the listener. Sorry, you probably can't see all these because of the photos. Also, useful language they can use to rephrase or paraphrase things. Language they can use for active listening. Even more sort of paralinguistic things like, use of gestures and so on. I also explained to the students at the beginning of the course that, speaking while wearing a mask can be a little bit difficult. And, if they ever felt unwell or they felt panicked or they were getting overheated wearing a mask, that they could just take a break in the listening activity anytime. And even if they had to go outside the classroom for a few minutes and take their mask off it, I said, that's perfectly okay. So, and then I reassured them, of course, that I would be maintaining social distancing throughout all the activities. And the students were very, very positive about it after all that. So I got to do most of the activities that I was planning to. With regards to, so this is this is kind of me and my class here with where my students are sitting. They're all sort of socially distanced with their desks spread apart, and me at the front here, all wearing our masks. With regards to doing the 3-minute presentation activity, I thought it was going to be difficult with this number of students to maintain social distancing with them all moving around the perimeter of the class, presenting to a number of different students. So what I did is I divided the class into groups based on where they were sitting. So just small groups of 3 or 4. For example, these 4 students sitting here would just be one speaking group. And I'd have them stand and do the 3-minute presentation from their desk, just to the surrounding 2 or 3 students. So they would take turns in their small group bubble, so to speak, to do their presentations. And that seemed to work quite well. The students were fine with it. The only problem was it was much more difficult to evaluate the students when they're all wearing a mask. Yeah, I just sort of had to, I sort of made some decisions that I would have to be realistic about what I could evaluate with them. And then with the bigger classes, I ended up just basically evaluating them on their ability to continue speaking in English for the 3 minutes about the topic given, and being able to produce the poster in advance and complete the listening tasks. So I had to sort of adjust my evaluation goals there quite a bit. And then actually, before we did the face-to-face COVID-19 lessons, we had one semester where we were completely online. And this was all very sudden. So this was last April. So we didn't have time to set up a fancy learner management system or Rachel's Padlet or anything like that. It was kind of all overnight. So I sort of went old school, but it seemed to work. I got the students to pre-record their 3-minute talks and just upload them to a secure shared drive that the university had. And then they accessed each other's presentations through the shared drive files and viewed them and completed their listening tasks that way. The format I used for the presentation upload, I just got them to record a PowerPoint presentation with audio and then upload that. There's an example here on the screen. But you could easily record a 3-minute Zoom presentation, or even possibly have the students record themselves on their smartphones and upload it. The smartphone video uploads are quite heavy though, so you might want to be careful with how much room you have on your shared drive. So just before I wrap up here, just a few final points about the things I've learned doing this type of activity. So it's a good idea to keep the poster instructions simple. Just get them to put photos on or images on the poster, or very short captions or bullet points in English. Otherwise, you'll find the students just read from their posters, and it doesn't really create much authenticity there as a speaking activity. Also, as I mentioned before, with a large face-to-face classroom or students all wearing masks, you have to be realistic on the quality of the feedback you can give to the students. Because remember, you're sort of mingling around all the presentations, trying to give them some kind of feedback later. And when they're all wearing masks, or there are a large number of students, you have to be realistic about the detailed feedback you can give them. Obviously, if it's a small class, then you can be much more specific. Face-to-face setup. The first time you do this type of activity face-to-face, the students might get a bit confused because they might not know where they're supposed to be standing, or they might be rotating around the presentations in the wrong direction or going the wrong way or something. So if you're going to make it a graded activity, I strongly recommend you have a practice session first, just so they get used to the dynamics of rotating around the classroom in a clockwise direction. And yeah, the mask strategies, the students seem to appreciate that, and introducing them at the beginning of the course, saying, okay, so we're all wearing masks. It's hard, but let's deal with it together, and use it as an opportunity to look at some language functions that the students need anyway, like checking and clarifying language, active listening, and so on. If you're going to do the online thing, probably some of you have already done this, but if you're going to be getting students to upload things or create recorded PowerPoint slides, make simple instruction manuals in advance with screenshots, and then give it to the students before you start the course. It'll save you a lot of time later with students saying, oh, I don't know how to upload this, or I don't know how to create this type of presentation. This will save you it's a little bit of work at the beginning, but it'll save you time later. Finally, the templates and presentation examples, and also the COVID-19 speaking strategy slides of all, you can all download. You can download all of them from this link here if you want them. This link goes to my website, pomaka.com, and I'll keep the link open for about a week. So if you want to download any of the materials and edit them, feel free to do so. If you're interested in oral presentations in your classrooms, I've also put on a proposal for to do a talk at the JALT 2021 National Conference. Feel free to come along. I'll talk about more ideas for doing oral presentations, particularly about how to evaluate and peer evaluate. So anyway, before I completely lose my voice, I'll finish up there. So feel free to let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Spot on. Spot on.
Oh, really? Is that 20 minutes exactly?
38 seconds left. Okay, thank you, Paul. Let's now open it up for 10 minutes of Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, let's start now, please. Go ahead. Come on. Okay, I've got a question.
Rob.
So as the listeners are rotating around the different presentations, so are they taking notes or something, or what's happening there? Well, they're just listening.
Yeah, no, well, I always be sure to give them some kind of listening task. So, you know, you could say, okay, in the case of the place I traveled to, when I gave them that form, so I'll just go back here if I can find it. So the example of the a place I traveled to presentations, the listeners would have to complete this form. So that so they would have to write the presenters' names and the places that they traveled to for that particular activity. But that was quite a low level one. If you have high level students, you might say, okay, you know, think of 2 or 3 questions you can ask for each presenter while they're doing it. I prefer giving them some kind of form though, because then I can have them submit it later, and that can be part of the sort of evaluation to show that they've actually listened to the presentations. But I find that you keep the listening task quite simple. You know, just have them listen for 1 or 2 things or ask 1 or 2 questions. Otherwise they'll be too busy taking notes and not actually watching the poster.
So they're not actually, the listeners don't actually write a report about, for example, the most interesting 3 presentations they listened to or something, or they just...
No, but I mean, you could do that as a sort of a follow-up activity. You could, I suppose, potentially have them peer review each presentation and give them scores and things like that. Yeah, I mean, sure. It's really unlimited to what you want the listeners to do. I would recommend keeping it simple.
On the presenter, right?
Sorry?
Your focus was more on the presenter more than
and giving the focus is more on the presenter, yeah, and then just giving the listeners something to do to keep them engaged. But yeah, my evaluation was more focused on the presenters, yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So anyone has any other questions, please, We have seven and a half minutes left. So this class is actually a presentation class, is it, or is it part of it?
No, these ones are not. These are just basically general communication classes. So integrated skills.
Is it? Or,
sorry?
Or relates to the textbook?
Yeah. The presentations will be related to some kind of class content that you'd covered in the course. Maybe you've been talking about past experiences in your course, and then so obviously you'd have them describe some kind of past experience. These particular activities were just part of a general English communication class. Yeah, and I actually, sorry.
How many presentations would they do in one semester then?
Usually with this, I'd have them do a couple. I would do this activity twice per semester. And I actually usually make it part of their in-class test. So I'll have an in-class test, 2 in-class tests each semester. And there will be a paper version of the test with, it's more traditional style test. And this will be the speaking part of the test. So the score for this presentation will be part of the test. Not the entire score though, because I think it's a little bit difficult to give them, as I said before, very, very specific grading when you're trying to evaluate everyone at the same time. So, but I often make it part of the test though.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions out there, please?
Yeah, I have a question. Oh,
Sure.
so there's a pop-up question. Do you want to do that one first?
Either or.
This is really interesting. How do you get a lower level to speak for 3 minutes? Good point.
I'm wondering, out? This was my question. Are they writing out their presentations or?
No. Yeah, so that's the thing. You're giving them the topic in advance. So obviously you give it at least a week before, so they'll have time to prepare their presentations. But no, they can't use their notes in the presentation usually. I just had them use their poster photos to help them present. So that's why I give them the advance time to prepare. I also say, you can write out your presentation fine to practice it, but on the actual day, they can only use their poster. It's also good to give the students an example of a poster presentation when you give them the topic and when you set it up. So, okay, this is an example of what I'm expecting for content. Maybe you could give them an example manuscript, or you could actually do one yourself to show them what sort of content you're looking for. But yeah, some of the weaker students, obviously I would encourage them to write out their presentation to practice it, but during the presentation, just the poster, no writing. Although some of the students have been a bit sneaky and wrote on the back of their posters. I just sort of clamped down on that.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, that covers it. Thank you so much.
Sorry, there was one other question, was it? Was there one other question? Sorry, I can't find my notes, my comments.
The chat question was that about the lower level speaking for.
Oh yeah, that was it. Okay, fine.
I mean, the limit is 3 minutes, so there's no minimum, is there? You can speak at least.
Well, yeah, you could change the limit. You could have them talk for 2 minutes or 4 minutes. It's really up to you. I found a 3 minute changing the partners every 3 minutes was quite a nice sort of dynamic way to do them. Depending on your students, after 4 or 5 minutes, most students sort of burn out a bit, peter out, and the waffle starts to creep in. But yeah, it's good to keep it quite dynamic. So make them quite short and sharp, and have them change every time the alarm goes. But yeah, the timing is really up to you how long you make them.
Yeah. What's students' reaction to this kind of lesson? The students enjoy it?
Yeah, they do. Even the low motivation students seem to enjoy it. I think it's the fact that they're not speaking to the same partner all the time, and they're changing partners every 3 minutes. So they're getting they're getting a bit of variety there. Sure, they're repeating the same presentation a number of times. But yeah, the reactions are good. Some of the low-level students say that to me, they're really surprised that they could actually speak for 3 minutes. They say, wow, even I can do it. So yeah, the feedback's been good.
Yeah. Okay, 2 more minutes. Anyone else have any other questions? Please go ahead.
There's a question in the chat, perhaps.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
For some reason, I can't see the chat at the moment. What's the question, Rob?
The chat
Sorry,
button will open the window.
That was my question. Basically, I was just curious about the criteria that the students are evaluated on, like in this part of this kind of activity, what types of things are you evaluating them on? And do the students get a rubric in advance or know what to prepare for?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So obviously you decide what you want to evaluate them on for your activities. But it's important that they know in advance how they're going to get graded for these activities. For example, am I just going to get graded if I can speak in L2 about this topic for 3 minutes without using L1, or am I going to get graded on how well I can deliver the presentation, eye contact, body language, and so on, or am I going to get graded on how well I organize my presentation, for example, signposting and linking? You sort of have to choose that yourself at the beginning and let the students know. My example there of a place I traveled to, that I told them in advance, okay, so you're going to be graded on your delivery, and explain to them what delivery meant. And also they'll get graded on preparing the poster and printing it out in advance, and also completing their listener sheet. But it varies. I vary the grading criteria depending on the group. But yeah, you need that, of course, because otherwise the students are like, well, how am I getting graded for this?
I have a follow-up question on that. In the in-person classroom, when you're in class and everyone's speaking, I have found it really difficult, especially when you have a really quiet student who, despite all her best efforts or his best efforts, just won't speak a little louder than some of his peers or her peers around them. And it's really hard to just listen and grade. What do you have any tips or techniques that you found that work to really hear that student and get a good evaluation on them?
Yeah, that's a challenge of doing this type of activity. It is.
Please.
Sorry?
Answer in 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Rachel, stand closer to the student. But it is hard to hear sometimes. You can ask them to speak up during the activity if you can. But I try to have the groups spread out as much as possible in the classroom, so I can sort of sneak in between them and stand really close. At the beginning, the students feel a bit awkward. Why is he standing so close to me at the moment? But it's
okay. Let's wrap it up then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paul. For that.
I want you.
So everyone. Okay, everyone, let's resume for our last presentation for today. So the topic of sexual harassment in Japanese society is probably a very topical one at the moment. And perhaps young women in Japan may be very hesitant to speak out about their sexual harassment experiences, even in their native language. However, in the guise of foreign language learning, female students may be less apprehensive about this, as they may see it as a language learning exercise or experience. So our last MyShare presenter, Elisabeth Williams from Doshisha Women's College, will share with us some activities she has used in the classroom to facilitate discussion on this sensitive issue. Libby, your time starts from now.
All right, I will share my screen. Here we are. All right, everybody can see this okay? Yes, great, thank you. Okay, thank you so much for the introduction.
Yes, so my name is Elisabeth Williams. I generally go by Libby. I'm an assistant professor at Doshisha Women's College of Liberal Arts. Today I'm going to be speaking about my experience teaching an introductory gender studies class, specifically focusing on talking about the very important but often very difficult topics of sexual harassment and assault. So I'm just going to share two activities that I did in this course last year. I'll start by giving a bit of context to the class, talk about some of the goals, then look at the activities, and then discuss some things that perhaps went well and some that were very challenging, and then we'll go into the Q&A. All right. So this class, it was a special English medium instruction class, so an EMI class for students who should have been abroad at English-speaking universities. So they should have been taking kind of introductory courses like this, but because of the COVID pandemic, of course, unfortunately, they could not. So the university asked some of us to make kind of special classes for this group of students. So I had 5 students in this class. It was a very small, very close-knit group, second-year students who they all knew each other already. So we had generally a very good, a very warm and open atmosphere. Because it was kind of supposed to emulate these classes abroad, the class didn't require really a specific English skills focus. And so we didn't spend that much time, going over things like grammar and vocabulary. And in a way that was a bit of a struggle at times. So we'll talk more about that later. And the way that the class was kind of run was that after going through basic feminist theory and theory from masculinity studies, then we moved into looking at case studies. So gendered relations in 3 countries, New Zealand, Japan, and Iran. So these specific activities take the place in the context of our Japan case study. So everything that we did was in person. So this was in-person classes, this course, but I think these activities could be easily adapted for Zoom. So that's something we can talk about in the Q&A if you like. So of course, there were many goals for this class, but the one that I think is connected to today's presentation is that we aimed to discuss how ideas of gender connect to wider structures of power in a community, in society. And that is connected, I think, to the first reason why it's important to speak about these topics. And as was already mentioned, we're seeing a lot of issues in the media with talking about harassment and gender inequality in Japan. And we can see, I think, quite clearly the way that these gendered relations, so essentially thinking about harassment and sexual harassment and abuse, the way that the abuse of women generally by men is connected to these wider kind of gendered hierarchies in society. So I think that looking at these topics addresses that course goal. And really, very unfortunately, we know that harassment in particular is a very, sexual harassment is a reality in many students' lives, particularly female students. And yes, and then in the media, on social media, we're seeing a lot more open discussion about these issues, and a lot of kind of modern or current feminist figures like journalist Shiori Ito or Dr. Ueno Chizuko at Tokyo University have also been very open speaking about these issues. Now, of course, we also, I think we can kind of guess why it's not always easy to speak about these issues. First is that there's still a lot of taboo and discomfort, I think personal discomfort around these, the topics of sexual harassment and sexual assault. And we need to be very sensitive, of course, when we do speak about them, because there's a good chance that students have experienced them, and some students may have lingering trauma from that. And if we think about the kind of English language skills side, there might be a lot of unfamiliar language for students. So when we're speaking about these topics in English, there's a lot of words that have become very common in the last few years, like consent or victim blaming or, things like that. So this is language that students might not be familiar with. So we might have a difficult time even just speaking about it in English. So moving on to looking at the two activities that we use. So they took place in the context of two classes within the course, where we were looking at current issues in Japanese feminist movements. And there was the two activities that I'll focus on. We did a lot more than this, but just for today, looking at, we looked at a PDF of rape myths that I used online from a university in the States, and also a street interview YouTube video. So let's take a look at the activities. So first, starting to break the subject of sexual harassment and sexual assault. I thought it was important first to, before going into looking at the PDF about rape myths, was to discuss what is a myth, right? So we got together in pairs and we talked about what is the definition of a myth, and then we made some example sentences together. So with the students, the definition we came up with was a widely held but false belief or idea. And the examples: a common myth in business is that men are better team leaders than women. Do you think it's a myth that men cannot be sufficient caregivers to children? So we, after we talked about the definition and we looked at some examples together, then I wanted to move into speaking specifically about myths about sexual harassment and assault. But I thought it was important to first give or to first discuss an example as a class together using some visual, a visual prompt. So I found an image online that talked about the common misconception that clothing equals consent. And so this is the image that we used. This doesn't mean yes, this doesn't mean no. So we have the same woman here who's dressed in very different styles of clothing. This is, we talked about in class, what do you think this means? What is basically, what myth is this trying to expose? And so from here, we discussed the connection between clothing and sexual invitations, et cetera, and how basically the misconceptions behind this. So that was our first example of a myth in this context. So from there, we went on to brainstorming with a partner about myths and then sharing them with the class. So this part, unfortunately, we didn't come up with as many myths as I had hoped, but the three that the class did, we came up with as a class. Women often lie about sexual assault and harassment. Men cannot be sexually assaulted. Sexual harassment is not a serious problem in Japan. So these were the three that we came up with as a class. And from here, we moved into looking at the PDF, the rape myths PDF online. So students, I uploaded this to the university platform, and we have our online class page. So students could access it on their phones or on their own laptops. So the way that we approach this activity, basically students in pairs, they kind of skim through. It's actually 2 pages, but I just have the first page here. So they skimmed through, discussed the meaning with their partner, and then they also talked about just basically their opinions, their perspectives about the myths and the facts below. And so during this time, I just kind of circulated and helped mostly with vocabulary, because there was quite a bit of challenging vocabulary in the PDF. And we talked about the ideas kind of, I walked around and talked about the ideas with the students. So it's difficult to see here, but some we have victims provoke rape when they dress provocatively. Oh, sorry. It's not rape if it happens after drinking. Only young, pretty women get raped, etc. So after students had discussed this a little bit with their partners, then as we kind of came back as a class, and we went over what myths the students had heard before, just getting a little bit of feedback about their own perspectives. And then we added these myths to the previous list that we had made. All right, and I think this activity was a little bit challenging, as I mentioned, because of the vocabulary. And I think we can see it in the first example here, right? So provoke and provocatively. So these were both words that students struggled a little bit with. So after we looked at that PDF, then I wanted to bring the I kind of wanted to bring the class, the context to Japan, since that was the case study that we were looking at. And I thought I would do this by using a YouTube video about Me Too, opinions about Me Too in Japan. And we had spoken about Me Too in previous classes, but mostly in the context of countries abroad, particularly where it kind of started in Hollywood and in the United States. And so after we did just a brief review, then we went into watching the video. And the video that I chose is by a YouTube channel called Asian Boss. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, but they do a lot of very interesting individual interviews and street interviews in countries all over Asia. And this one was street interviews in Tokyo. Just asking kind of random people what they thought about the Me Too movement, if they knew it, what they thought about it. So one of the reasons why I chose this video is that I thought that it showed an interesting gap in between what younger people, particularly younger women, thought and some of the older men in the video. So I just have a couple screenshots to quickly look at. Here, these two women were talking about how they think sexual harassment and assault are very serious issues in Japan, but that it's not something people feel comfortable talking about, and they believe that people should be speaking more about it. Sorry. And then we have contrast to this man here with the glasses, who spoke about how he felt many women were, yes, overreacting to compliments and to basically his opinion that Japan has the traditional gender roles in Japan are based on women serving men, and this isn't a negative thing, but a lot of younger women don't understand it anymore, basically. And then there also are some examples about women who have been harassed or assaulted. And this woman here shares her experience where she was groped walking back from the train station, and obviously was very traumatizing for her. She said she couldn't walk home alone for about a month after that. So we watched this video with the street interviews, and then in partners, we discussed these three very general questions. And I really try to encourage students, to speak about anything in relation to the topics, but these were kind of the guiding questions. So the first question, what do you think of the video you just watched? Did you agree, disagree with anything you saw in the video, and why? And why do you think such a low amount of female victims report sexual assault to police in Japan? And it's estimated to be around 4.3%. And this is something that came up in the video. So after we discussed, we came back as a class, and students kind of summarized their pair discussions. And then we had a really kind of open, robust discussion in English about the topic. And that relates to, I think, some of the successes from these activities. The first being that, yes, we had a very open discussion where all the students shared either their experiences or maybe something from someone else they knew experienced. And I think that the students were really able to kind of connect these experiences of harassment to gendered images of men and women in Japanese society, sometimes outside of Japanese society as well, and how this relates to those structures of power where, I mean, generally men are oppressing women through the acts of harassment and through the acts of sexual assault. And so that connected, of course, to the course goal that I spoke about earlier in the presentation. And after this, so the homework assignment that we had after these two classes was a short essay, personal reflection, of course, in English. And it seemed that students really seemed to learn a lot through the activities, and that they found the video quite a helpful prompt for discussion and to kind of open up about these experiences and to critically reflect on the issues in Japan. So I felt that the activities helped us reach those course goals, but they were certainly, it wasn't without the challenges. And I think that it was the PDF activity that was particularly difficult. And it could be that students were hesitant to share their ideas about myths about sexual harassment and assault, or they didn't have so many ideas about it, but they just weren't comfortable. But I did feel like the conversation was a little bit kind of, it wasn't very smooth at that section of the class. And as I mentioned before, there were some struggles with vocabulary, and I didn't pre-teach vocabulary except for consent and myth, really, before we went into the activity. So things like non-consensual, provocative, victim blaming, these words came up a lot in the PDF activity, but students were quite unfamiliar. And then again, just thinking about how important, but how sensitive these issues can be, speaking about sexual harassment and sexual assault. We moved quite slowly through the activities and through those two classes. So we really just didn't have enough time, I think, we could have discussed, I think, even more deeply and even more critically. So those were some of the challenges. All right, so that is the end. I'm stopping just about 2 minutes early. Thank you very much for listening, and please do feel free to ask any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Libby. There's one question from Richard, and he asks, have you tried this with a larger group?
That's a great question. No, I have not. This was the first time that I taught the introductory gender studies course. And it's the first time that, that I used this activity. I certainly think that it would be doable.
Well, don't you think it'd be easier for students to talk in with a smaller group than within a larger group? I mean, just.
I'm sorry. I thought you meant with a larger class. But the question, yeah. So I think.
Richard, you want to clarify?
Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, so it was a larger class. You said your class is about 4 people at the moment. So, for example, if the class had 40 people, for example.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that was one of the reasons why we were able to speak quite openly about these topics, is because we were such a close-knit group, such a small group, right? The students all knew each other before. So I definitely think, and being a women's university as well, right? So I think that if we had a larger group, and if it was, yeah, a group with more diversity, it could be a little more challenging. So I would definitely, I think that with these kind of topics, it's really important never to pressure the students to speak about it if they don't feel comfortable. And also, I think that being in small groups first, I mean, like with many activities, can really kind of get them talking and get them more comfortable. So I think I would keep the activities quite small.
Any other questions? Please go ahead. What was the level of your students anyway? I mean, it's quite a, I mean, emotionally it's a difficult topic anyway, but to be able to actually express yourself about the topic, what sort of level were the students? Like on the SEPA?
Yes.
Would you say there are big?
Oh, it really ranged. So this particular group of students, they're kind of, the way that they're assessed is from A to G, I think, and A being the highest. And so we had students, there were students from really kind of the top proficiency to really I would say quite beginner level students. But again, because it was an English medium class and it wasn't so much of a skills focus, we did mix Japanese when we had struggles, and we kind of worked together to talk about it. Yeah, I think Rachel, I think you had a question.
Yes, so not so much a question, I think maybe more it's just a comment or regarding the hesitation you faced with the PDF activity. I'm wondering, would it, if there was a way for students to brainstorm or share their ideas anonymously at first, whether that would be something that could create more ideas for the activity to then springboard to the next point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think just given the high use of like online platforms now, I think that's something that could be easily facilitated into the class. And if I was to use these activities with larger classes, that would certainly be a really great option, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? So I'm guessing this is the first time you did this, is it? The first time to do this topic?
Yeah, the first time, yeah, to teach.
So after doing it one time, any reflections on how you might have approached it differently next time, or?
I think I mean, if I'm going to be totally honest, I wasn't always comfortable speaking about some of the topics myself. So I think I would like to kind of be able to go about, not in a more like, almost maybe I was too hesitant at times, I think. So perhaps to try to approach things even a little more academically, as opposed to, I don't know. Yeah, it was tough, right? I think talking about things like rape, sexual assault, it's really hard. And I always want to be very conscious of the students' feelings. I don't think it could ever really be easily done. So yeah. Yes, Paul.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Libby. It was very interesting. How did you evaluate student performance in the course or classes?
That's an excellent question. And I should have mentioned that with these activities were, it was only the video discussion that was evaluated, and that was only for participation. Yeah, so this course, the evaluation was more, we had a small group facilitated discussion where students chose an article about the course content, and then they kind of facilitated small, because we only had 5 students, it was quite smooth. Then we had a final presentation and a final paper.
So you mean they were evaluated for their participation and the presentation and the final paper?
Yes, those were the main things. And then, of course, there was, you know, attendance and.
I see.
Homework,
Thank you.
blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Okay, are there any other comments?
I see.
Rachel has a question.
Yeah. So I think Baby Low has a comment. What's that? I don't know what that is.
Angela's baby.
Oh, I see.
I was just trying to be funny. Yeah.
I do have a real question though.
Yes.
If that's okay. So
Yeah.
do you think you would approach this differently if you had a mixed class, a mixed gender class,
Yeah.
males and females in the class?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it 100% has a place in mixed classes, but I haven't had the opportunity to use it yet. How I would do it differently, I would really have to think about, I think, the way that the groups, that the small groups were put together. And I think that I would do more earlier activities about men's place in this, basically. So in speaking out against sexual harassment and sexual assault, and look more at statistics that involve men, whereas having a women's university with only 5 women, I focused much more on the female experience. So yeah.
We've got 2.5 minutes left, so if anyone else has a comment or has a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, I do.
Rachel, you have a question?
I just wanted to say that I have done this topic with a mixed group of students. Not exactly intentionally, but I let students choose the topic, and several women from Japan came with this topic. And it was very interesting about the female-only cars. And I'm not exactly proud of that class, I have to say. It devolved a little bit into a debate over somehow whether or not it was worth the money they spent on these cars or something. And the men were against it and the women were for it. It was kind of, you know, so it kind of started out well, but then didn't really go anywhere. And I think that was largely to my lack of skill or preparation for the topic. So I was very interested in what you said and how you scaffolded things. So I really, really appreciate your talk. Because I felt that it was useful to students, and there was a lot of value in discussing it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very difficult, as I said, it's a very difficult but very worthwhile topic. So thank you. And I think Rachel had another question.
Yes. So was this course designed as was this an elective that students could choose to take, or was it something that the students were required to take? I'm curious because when you said you only had when you had 5 students, I'm wondering, is there a way to, I guess, get more students in the class? I guess what I'm getting at is, like, is this something that Japanese students would want to take and want to do more discussion about?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I do think that it's becoming more of a less of a taboo topic. But the context of this class is that for this particular group of students, they were all supposed to have been abroad in English-speaking universities, but couldn't go because of COVID. So the university asked us to a couple of us to create these very small kind of seminar classes for the students. And so yeah, that's why it was so small, and it was just for a really kind of a very particular group of students.
Thank you. And the second question I have was, you mentioned earlier you had case studies with New Zealand, Japan, and Iran. Could you describe that more about what that looked like, or how that was taught in the course?
Absolutely, yeah. Do I have time? Sorry?
10 seconds. Can
Okay,
you wrap it up?
Why don't we connect over email and I can send that information to you?
That would be awesome. Thank you so much.
We can also leave the Zoom meeting open if you guys want to stay on and keep chatting, but we have to wrap it up now.
No problem.
Okay. Let's connect over email, and I'd love to pick your brain later.
Yeah, that I would also, because I enjoyed your presentation very much. So
Thank you.
great. Thank you, everybody.
Hand you back now to Lee. Thank you, Libby.
Yes.
And hand you back to Lee for the closing remarks.
Yes, and thank you again, Libby, and to all the presenters today. It was very interesting and very informative, and really great to be back in a group together, although it's remote. We're not in the same room, but this is certainly much better than nothing, isn't it? So thank you again to all the presenters for your time, for your efforts. I mean, traditionally after our event, we'd go out and have a nice lunch. Actually, Nara JALT in April, we'd probably go out into the park. It's always a nice place, and have a little picnic in the Nara Park. But unfortunately, we have to still be patient with that. But as I said, I mean, at least we can have this kind of interaction, which is very valuable for me, and I think I can speak for all of us. So thank you, presenters. Thank you also to the officers. There's a lot of effort that goes into these events, a lot of time, and thank you to everyone involved there, and also to participants for joining us today from near and far. It's really good to see you all, to have you all here with us, and we look forward to more participation in the future. I don't have the next event to announce, but you'll be in our network, and you'll be finding out shortly when our next event is on, and then we look forward to seeing your faces again, probably online for some time, but hopefully in the not too distant future we'll be able to get back together again in the same room. I think we'll still actually, you know, after 2020, I think we'll still keep that online element to be able to have people like Gina's coming from Chicago, which is really a new, I guess, a new adventure for Nara JALT, to be able to welcome people from overseas and all over the world. It's great. So once again, thank you to everyone. And I'm going to leave this meeting open just for a little bit more, and ask the officers to stay on. But if you're quite welcome to continue the chats here. But I'll close this MyShare Nara JALT event by once again saying thank you very much, and see you next time.